Hello, everyone. I'm carrying on talking about Trump and his visit to St. John's Church in Washington, D.C. last year. And General Milley accompanied him, and he later thought the better of it. He rued having done that. He apologised to the public, saying it could have produced the erroneous impression that the military was being partisan. Anyway, the border wall was Trump's flagship policy. Now, even the most witless person can comprehend a wall. It's an image which carried into victory in that presidential election. Trump likes extremely simple ideas, possibly because he's a simpleton. That the Great Wall of China would work. Well, that was actually against an invasion, and China was successfully invaded a number of times, but that's by the by. The president he promised to boot out millions of illegal immigrants, playing on white anxiety there. He had little success with that. Arrests of illegal immigrants near the border wall reached an all-time high. But there were other areas of this that didn't go so well for him. But those arrests suggested that more people were coming than ever. Therefore, his bid to keep them out failed. He was a huge failure in his own terms. Deportations fell. The highest ever years for deportations were under Obama, 2012 to 2014. So the Democrats, they are tough on immigration. That doesn't mean that they're savage on it, like Trump would like to be. So much for the Republican accusation that Obama had an open border was in favour of it. But that's yet another flagrant lie. So no lie is too blatant or too stinking for Republicans to tell. They're just shameless. So Trump and his acolytes are just too idiotic. But I mean, he's got a lot of idiotic supporters, and his cultists, they fall for it. They hang on his lips. So the Trump admin was all in favour of prosecuting illegal immigrants and not simply removing them. But wait a second, if you prosecute them, you have to keep them in the United States longer. I thought the idea was to get rid of them as soon as possible. That clogs up the court system, that costs more money, keeping them in jail, and the lawyers' fees and so on. I thought you're the party of low taxation. This is big government, it's wasting money. Anyway, so the Trump government began a policy of separating parents from children when they caught illegal immigrants. And the parents often had no idea where the children were held, could be hundreds of miles away, had no means of contacting them. You imagine the completely unnecessary distress you're causing them, which obviously leads to bad health outcomes, more likely to try and escape in a bit to find them and so on. Some children were held in cages. Now, Trump assured the public that this was vital for national security. How come it wasn't vital for national security in the previous 250 years of American history? Anyway, this policy sparked global outrage. Former First Lady Laura Bush said that she was one of the lockstep Republicans for whom this policy was more than she could stomach, and she raised her voice against this as an unchristian act, and it was unbecoming of the United States, which is supposed to found itself on human rights. And some of the children weren't even provided with soap. So Fox News host Laura Ingraham said the children were in something like summer camp. Well, what kind of a negligent mother is she? I think her children should be taken away from her if she thinks that's what summer camp is. I pity her 3 adopted children. Strange that she abominates immigrants, since her 3 children are immigrants whom she adopted from Central America. Hey, I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but she does. She thinks Hispanic people moving to the United States, even legally, is the end of the world. She could have adopted American children. Anyway, so it was always double standards with them. The Department of Homeland Security, they launched an official investigation into the child separations at the border, and it found that the children were often held in dirty, dangerous, and overcrowded conditions and were inadequately nourished. That's Trump's own Homeland Security Department. The head of Customs and Border Protection said it was a humanitarian crisis. That's a direct quotation, humanitarian crisis. And the children were only supposed to be detained for 20 days before being handed over to refugees resettlement. In practice, the children were often held far longer. So the so-called policy was vital for national security. It wasn't about national security at all. When did one of these children ever kill anybody in the United States? Trump caved into public opinion and ended the policy after only a few weeks. So he's weak-willed then. I mean, I think he made the right decision, but he made it for the wrong reason, simply because it was getting him just so much bad press. And they're probably actually disappointed some of the sadistic wing of the Republican Party who wanted more cruelty to brown people. Anyway, despite this order, the policy wasn't entirely discontinued. Republicans didn't round on him for betraying the anti-immigrant cause. And you notice a lot of them actually don't really distinguish between legal and illegal immigration, call it an invasion and so on. Anyway, so in 2018, Trump, he moved 6,000 troops to the Mexican border. He was not about to invade the United States of Mexico. The US military has no power of arrest and could do nothing about illegal immigration. They were walking spin. It was solely for the sake of optics. Trump's admirers thrilled with this bellicose posturing. You know, what about supporting your troops in Afghanistan? Send more of them there, or Syria, or wherever he wanted to fight, or do something useful, or even build that border wall. But anyway, so Trump used the word invasion in relation to immigration. I mean, I don't know of a single one who came across with a gun. And so that's not a metaphor. Then it's not that his fans don't perceive it as metaphorical. Some of them have formed themselves into militias and are patrolling with firearms. And by the way, you know, Americans, like white Americans, they didn't get permission from Native American nations when they arrived. They simply arrived. Okay, sometimes as terra nullius, but sometimes it was a frank and outright invasion with guns, with killing the autochthonous people. Now, Americans today aren't responsible for what happened in bygone centuries, but invasions really have happened. Mexico's never invaded the United States. It has been the other way around twice. Anyway, so Trump raged against birthright citizenship, said people shouldn't be granted citizenship by virtue of being born in the United States. Now, that played well with white supremacists, who often believe that non-white Americans aren't real Americans, which is why there was all this birtherism about Obama. It was a Republican president, Ronald Reagan, who introduced birthright citizenship, and he's a Republican saint, the brightest star in their firmament. All those Reagan Democrats who we won over to the party. Anyway, prior to that, children born in the United States of non-citizen parents were not automatically citizens. I know, like African Americans under Dred Scott weren't citizens even if born in the US, or some of the Native Americans didn't get to be, but generally speaking, since the 1980s, virtually everybody born in the United States gets to be American citizen, even if their parents aren't Americans. Anyway, so there Trump was trashing the legacy of a Republican icon. I mean, I'm not a Reaganite, but that's one of the few Reagan decisions I approve of. So the president, then he railed against various other things, immigration, both legal and illegal, despite immigration actually being fairly low into the United States. And obviously most illegal immigrants come through legal ports of entry. They fly in, they take ships in, or they drive in through legal border crossings. They come as tourists, as students, on business trips, and they just overstay their visas. He suggests that immigrants were members of the MS-13 gang. Now, I don't know that to be bogus. There might be a few, because of all the immigrants, legal and illegal, that come to the United States each year, several million, how many would be members of MS-13? I would suggest an infinitesimally small proportion of that. So hugely focusing on something which is just of negligible importance in the grand scheme of things. So illegal immigrants have lower crime rates than US citizens. They strive to avoid contact with law enforcement because they know if they're caught doing a very minor thing. I met a guy who spent years in the United States, but caught with cannabis once, and then he got deported back to Nicaragua, where he was from. So Trump did everything in his power to heighten animosity towards immigrants, legal and illegal. So his wives then. Anyway, this naturally spilled over into odium against ethnic minorities, Americans, because whether you got the citizenship or not, well, that's just a piece of paper. The white supremacists wouldn't care about that, wouldn't accept you're a real American if you're not a white Anglophone and so on. So this is just how he is so endlessly rebarbative. He's done everything he can to whip up hatred for all sorts of people. Anyway, the president, he was elated with the US Supreme Court, which said that using a public charge to reduce the number of people obtaining green cards. So in 2019, the court said the president could prevent almost anybody from Central America being given asylum. And that's despite Central America being one of the most violent regions on the planet. So murders in Central America are often because of narco wars, these drug gangs fighting each other, and the drugs are overwhelmingly sold into the United States. And drug dealing is so profitable precisely because it is illegal. The murders in Central America are usually with US manufactured firearms. So the United States could solve a lot of these problems in a stroke by decriminalizing drugs. Now, hear me out. That would hit the profits of Republican donors, so we can't have that because they like the prison industrial complex. And the US has obviously interfered in Central America a number of times, invaded, engineered coups, occupied some of these countries. These are the slaughterhouse states because of Uncle Sam. So why wouldn't people from these benighted and impoverished countries want to flee to the United States, which is more prosperous and peaceful? They're running away from profound problems that the United States has purposefully created. And if drugs were legalized, the profits would fall. Drug dealers do it because it's the easiest way to make money. It's much more difficult to make money by kidnapping people. There are not that many rich people. They're well defended. They can go abroad. People are difficult to hide, difficult to smuggle, much harder to hide and smuggle than drugs. And then, so crime would fall. Obviously, the slayings would fall. Life would get better in Central America. There would be less reason to leave Central America, to move into the United States. It would just be a win-win-win-win. And now, I know drugs are bad for people's health and can kill people, but people take their drugs anyway. We could have it more out in the open and treat it as a public health issue to reduce it. We've been here before with prohibition, and prohibition doesn't work. I mean, taking drugs is very foolish. I would deprecate that. Better if nobody took drugs, but they're always going to. I'm a capitalist. You can't buck the market. That's what Margaret Thatcher said. Anyway, so Trump demanded that immigration judges hear 700 cases each per annum, or else they'll be regarded as failing. So this is political interference in the judiciary. They've got to give people a fair hearing, hear them out properly, not rush it through. But if they do have hasty hearings, this means that unfair decisions are going to be made, ill-considered decisions are going to be made, not necessarily against the applicant. People might be granted the right to stay in the United States who shouldn't be granted it, which would lead to even more immigrants in the United States, which is therefore the exact opposite of what he intended. His policies are not rational, they're never thought through. They're all about headline grabbing. So it's just highly foolish. So in 2018, he had his federal government shut down. He said he took full responsibility for it. Now that's unique. He evidently believed that brinksmanship would play well with the anti-immigrant lobby. Yet it was yet more puerile posturing about machismo. So Congress and the president, and the president, they sparred over the border wall. Congress refused to do it. Why should they? Trump said that Mexico would pay for it, so therefore not a cent of American taxpayers' money should go towards it. A quarter of all government activity ceased due to the shutdown. Many federal employees went unpaid. $3 billion was lost to the economy through the shutdown. That's more than half of the $5.5 billion that Trump said it was needed for the wall. And remember, in his campaign, he was most specific when Jeb Bush suggested it might be a fence. No, said Trump, a wall, not a fence. Anyway, on Valentine's Day 2019, Congress granted Trump $1.37 billion for repairing the extant Obama-era border fence. Why does Obama not win plaudits for Republicans? He at least built a border barrier on part of the border, and yet they say he was for open borders. Nothing could be further from the truth. It was yet another barefaced lie by this lying party of liars. So anyway, the money that Congress granted Trump was not to build an inch of wall, and he didn't build an inch of it. The budget was signed. The shutdown was for 45 days. That's the longest in US history, and Trump got 25%